Welcome to part 2 of the entire plot of Throne of Glass Book 1. We are going to be covering chapter 23 to the end of the book. If you're hoping to get the book from beginning and you haven't already watched part 1, you need to go back and watch part 1. Also, you should totally subscribe because I am going to be doing a recap of every single book in the Throne of Glass series. I'm starting from chapter 23 for a reason. A lot of stuff really just starts going in a whole different direction as soon as we get to this point. Okay, so Celaena is in her rooms and she is tossing and turning because for the first time in this entire competition, she's actually doubting if this is going to be an easy win for her. So the chapter starts with Cole like waking her up and being like, hey, wake up, it's Samhain, which Samhain is a holiday in Adarlan, which is basically, I believe, their version of the Day of the Dead. I'm not going to pretend to know that much about that holiday. At first, Celaena's pretty excited because she's like, I love Samhain, but then he's like, oh, well, you're not invited to any of the royal festivities. I just wanted to let you know it's the holiday and there will be festivities that you're not invited to. And then we're gonna hop over to Dorian's POV. He's walking around the castle and he runs into Chaol, Celaena, and Nehemia. And Dorian's actually starting to feel really guilty around Nehemia. If you watched part 1, you know that I mentioned a couple chapters ago there was this 2-week gap of time where we didn't really see Dorian. Basically, we find out that he has been knee-deep in politics fighting Parrington because Parrington wants to use the Lady Nehemia as basically a hostage to get her people of Eyllwe to bow the knee and basically do whatever Adarlan wants them to do. Dorian has been absolutely fighting that, but not really successfully, so he has a lot of guilt. I'm not exactly sure what excuse Celaena told Nehemia for why she can't come to the festivities because Nehemia doesn't actually know who she really is. She thinks she's the Lady Lillian. But Nehemia knows that she's not allowed to come to the festivities for whatever reason, and she's also trying to guilt Chaol and Dorian into letting her come, but neither of them are budging, sadly. As Dorian always does as his coping mechanism, he just ditches the scene and he decides to go to the kennels and hang out with his dogs that he breeds as a side hobby. And then on a side note, Nehemia and Celaena, who by the way, they still talk in Eyllwe a lot together, which drives Chaol and everyone else insane because no one else really knows Eyllwe as well as Nehemia and Celaena do. They come to an arrangement. Celaena is going to help Nehemia get better at the common tongue and Nehemia is going to help Celaena get better at Eyllwe because she's good, like she can carry a conversation, but it's not amazing. Obviously, Chaol sees this as a horrible thing that he needs to put a stop to instantly, but of course, Nehemia and Celaena are like, what's the big deal? Celaena just kills me in all of these scenes because she knows that it is such a huge security risk having her alone with Princess Nehemia, but Dorian and Chaol are so determined not to tell Nehemia about this competition that she just keeps getting left in the dark. So Chaol keeps telling them this is a really bad idea, and Nehemia and Celaena keep saying, what's the big deal, as they're walking through the gardens, and they're basically all three bickering about this. When they come to the base of the clock tower, do you remember the black stone clock tower we talked about with like the gargoyles around it, the weird markings that are like engraved at the bottom of the black stone? So they're walking through the gardens and they get to that clock tower, and who else like crouched down at the bottom of this clock tower than Kane, Duke Parrington's champion. And he's like cleaning it, like he is wiping at where the symbols are and cleaning it off. And if that wasn't weird enough, Nehemia knows what these markings are. They're called word marks. Mind you, I know some people say weird marks. No. Nehemia reveals that word marks are from an ancient religious language that died out years ago. And naturally, Celaena has a lot of questions and Nehemia just refuses to answer all of them. And she's like, I don't know anything else. I can't tell you anything else. And we pick up very quickly that that's not entirely the case. And then in Eyllwe, so that Chaol does not understand, they decide, okay, let's go ahead with these language lessons without Chaol knowing. Which I don't know how she really manages that with all the guards that are around her rooms at all times, but somehow they make it work. Chapter 24, we are going to jump forward to the Samhain festivities that Celaena is unfortunately not invited to. And she is bored in her room and she is just looking for something to do. She's bored out of her mind and she's just seething because this girl loves to party. So she's laying in bed. She just finished one of the books that Dorian got her, I'm sure. And she's looking at this tapestry that's on her wall and she notices that it ripples against the wall. There's a draft. And sure enough, she pulls back the tapestry and she finds a hidden door. She opens up this door and there is a secret passageway. There's nothing that I love more than like a hidden door slash hidden passageway storyline. And off the bat, she makes a couple observations. It clearly hasn't been used in years because the stairs are just covered with dust. So she goes down this really long staircase and then she comes up to 3 arches or portals, doorways of sorts. She decides to go through the middle one first. I don't know about y'all, but I'm more of like a start on the left and work my way over to the right, but she decides to just go straight forward to the middle because she hears something, I guess. So she's walking through this passageway and she realizes a couple things. One, this is potentially a really good escape way. Shortly after that, she realizes that this is an absolute maze because she's walking, and she's like not getting anywhere. Like it's just a labyrinth of passageways. And then the third thing is that she realizes she doesn't actually want to escape because she's afraid that Kale would get in trouble. Why do we care so much about Kale all of a sudden, Selena? What's going on there? She's gonna stay in the competition, win the competition, and then keep this escape a secret so that if when she becomes the King's champion, she starts getting asked to do things she's not comfortable with or stuff starts going really south, then she'll be able to escape through these passageways. So it's a win-win for everyone. So she decides at this point to just turn around and start heading back because it's been a while and she doesn't want anyone to realize she's not in the room because obviously it would give away that she found some sort of escape. So she starts heading back to the room and then she hears like music and voices in the distance. So she decides to go check it out. She follows the sound and ends up finding like this peephole onto the Sam Heughan festivities in the grand ballroom. In this part, like, I don't know why this part makes me so irrationally mad every single time I reread this book, which has been a couple times now. As she's looking down at this festival, she notices all of the champions, everyone who's a part of this competition, was invited to the festival and is down there just having a grand old time. She was literally the only one not invited. Something about that just... And then while she's looking, she sees Dorian, she sees Nehemia, and then she sees Kale, and then he starts to leave. And she realizes that earlier that day, he promised to like bring her something from the festival. So she realizes that he's on his way back to her rooms. And she just took a whole labyrinth of a maze to get to where she is. And somehow she has to hightail it back and up all those stairs before he gets there. So it's a race back to her rooms. So she gets back to her room, she closes the door, she puts down the tapestry, and she like dives into bed seconds before her door opens and Kale comes to see her. So she pretends to be asleep. I guess he falls for it, and mind you, okay, this part is so hard and uncomfortable to read. This to me is like peak love triangle cringiness right here. He realizes she's just asleep, and so he just kind of like stands there and stares at her for a little bit. I'm sure it's meant to be endearing, but this is also the point where we find out that Kale does have it down bad. Down bad crying in the gym. But he has it down bad for Selena. And this is all awkward because she's awake. Like, she knows that he walked in the room and she's aware that he's like staring at her, but she has to pretend to be asleep. So all this is really uncomfortable. And if that wasn't already uncomfortable enough, he eventually decides to stop being creepy and turn around and leave. And Dorian is standing behind him. This makes me so uncomfortable. I love Dorian, I love Kale, but this love triangle, it just makes me so uncomfortable for about 100 different reasons. Kale and Dorian just get in a fight right then and there, and how I imagine this is they're like whisper fighting and Selena's right there listening to the entire conversation. Kale is telling Dorian that he should not be visiting her unsupervised, and Dorian is telling Kale, you're just here to train her, you shouldn't be making unnecessary visits. They both clearly have a thing for her and they both are very clearly jealous, but they can't exactly admit that to the other person, and it's just very, very humorous. Flash forward to the next morning, because I've had enough of Sam Heughan festival night. Kale does come to see Selena in her rooms to bring her the party favor that he promised her, and it is a little ring. It's a little ruby ring. And the thing is he talks about how it's basically like a party favor where most ladies of the court would get their ring and then it would end up thrown away or forgotten after a couple days. But to her, it meant the world, and Cale giving it to her meant a lot. It's just a big deal. Chapter 25. Celaena decides to go down to the passages again another night, on a night that she feels pretty safe that neither Cale nor Dorian are gonna try to come visit. And she decides to go through the third door. And not far past that door, she comes across a tomb. And in this tomb are two basically statue-like crypts of the two people inside of the coffins. I'm sure there was a much more graceful way to say that, but I think you get the idea. And she quickly realizes that the man and the woman whose bodies are in this tomb are both wearing crowns. On top of that, she looks closer at the woman and she has a word mark on her forehead. And she also has arched and pointy ears. This woman was Fae, which is especially crazy because that would mean that this is the tomb of King Gavin and Queen Elena, aka the first king of Adarlan, the country where most of this book is taking place, and the first princess of Terrasen, the country that Celaena came from before the king of Adarlan just squashed it. And the odd thing is how historically significant these two people are, and yet their tombs are in a very unkempt, very neglected place in a forgotten passageway. And then next to King Gavin is a sword, and it is the sword Damaris. And this sword is a very big deal because it was used in a super big war, and it was the sword that slayed the Dark Lord Erewhon. A lot of people say it differently. I say Erewhon. Honestly, I'm just gonna read this next part because it's kind of a lot. Are you ready? I don't think you're ready for this next part. "You know your history," said a light female voice. Mind you, Celaena is alone in this passageway, and there's a voice. It's not coming from Celaena. Turns out it is quite literally the ghost of Queen Elena, who has quite literally been dead for over 1,000 years. So Celaena thinks she's dreaming. She's just like, what are you doing here? Like, why are you in my brain? So Queen Elena says that she's from another world, but she was able to slip into this world to give Celaena a warning. And I love how Celaena is less concerned about the warning, and she's like, what do you mean you slipped into this world? Like, how is that possible? I mean, priorities, but... So she says she had to sneak past the 8 guardians in order to get here while they were distracted, and basically confirms that the 8 guardians are the 8 gargoyles on top of the black stone clock tower. And then she delivers her warning. "Nothing is a coincidence. Everything has a purpose. You were meant to come to this castle just as you were meant to be an assassin to learn the necessary skills for survival. Something evil dwells in this castle, something wicked enough to make the stars quake. Its malice echoes into all worlds. You must stop it. Forget your friendships, forget your debts and oaths. Destroy it before it's too late, before a portal is ripped open so wide that there can be no undoing it. You must win this competition and become the king's champion." And then, if that wasn't already spooky enough, she goes, "They're coming," and then she just disappears. And then off in the distance, she hears a growl, like a growling noise coming from a literal live creature. So she hightails it back to her rooms as fast as humanly possible, because do you blame her? That is the only appropriate response. And then she hears a bunch of screaming behind her as she's running up the stairs to her room, but she closes the door, she closes the tapestry, she like pushes something in front of the tapestry where the door is, and then she like crawls into her bed. And then she wakes up and she realizes that it was all just a really bad dream. I know, I had the same reaction when I was reading it. I was just like, are you kidding me? But then she like rolls over in bed and she realizes she has something in her hand. It is the necklace that the ghost Elena was wearing, but it's real, in the palm of her hand. And then she realizes it wasn't actually a dream the whole time. It was real. A 1,000-year-old queen spoke to her in a ghost form. The gargoyles on the clock tower are alive, and there's a live creature in the passages. Her being an assassin wasn't an accident, and she needs to win the competition and vanquish an evil. No other directions were included. So this necklace is a metal amulet, basically, with like a gem in the middle that looks kind of like an eye, I guess. It's like a blue stone in the shape of an eye. So it sounds pretty. I'm sure I can find fan art somewhere. Here it is. She's like, you know what? I don't know about the whole vanquishing evil thing, but I think I can win the competition, so that's what we're gonna do. Chapter 26. Selena wakes up to Kale bursting into her rooms, and he's like, where were you last night? And she panics because clearly she's not going to tell him about the secret passages in her room. Otherwise he would totally get rid of them or just move her to different rooms, and she needs that backdoor escape plan. So she decides to pull the whole, I need to get ready for today's trial. But Kale informs her that it's been canceled because another champion has been murdered. 3 murders now. They were all murdered in the same exact form and fashion. We officially have a serial killing situation on our hands. So then it kind of clicks with Selena that this evil that she needs to vanquish very well might be this whole like serial killing situation that's going on in the castle. So Kale goes to investigate the murders, forgetting that he came in there in the first place to find out where she was last night. So I guess he's got one track mind. So he heads back to the murder scenes because now he's really got to figure out who's murdering everyone, because there's clearly a pattern and he doesn't really need there to be a 4th murder under his watch. So Selena decides that she's going to head back to the tombs to basically find out how much of what happened last night was in her head and how much of it was actually real. There's quite literally no reason why she should be the one to do everything and why she needs to be the one to vanquish evil. What does becoming the champion have anything to do with anything? And if this ghost knew that there was a dark evil, maybe she has an idea of how to get rid of it. So basically Selena's like, I need more information here. So she's heading back to the tomb. The more poking around she does and the more investigating she does, she realizes, you know what? Maybe the whole Queen Elena thing was a hallucination, and this evil thing is frankly none of my business. I'm just going to focus on the winning the competition part, and hopefully Kale and Dorian can take care of the serial killer, and then I did my part. Then we jump forward a couple hours, and I really need SJM to spell this one out a little bit more for me. Somehow Selena gets out of her rooms and finds her way through the castle to this murder scene and decides to just start taking a look around. Whoever was her guard that day should probably be fired, but that's none of my business. Her observations at this murder scene is that, like the other champions, he was half-eaten. All of his organs were taken out, including his brain. His face, and this is one of the things, it's like the first time we've heard about this, but this is also the first murder scene that we've seen, so we don't really know if the other ones were like this or not. But she said that the champion's face was frozen in like a silent scream. This book is not for the faint of heart if you can't stand gore. So somehow she can tell that his face was frozen in a scream, but at the same time his face was peeled off. I'm too scared to look up online what this scene might have looked like, so I'm just going to use my imagination there. She looks at the walls and she sees written in blood using hand word marks. The markings that are at the bottom of the stone clock tower, yeah, those word marks are written in blood on the walls, and then on top of that someone tried to like smudge them out. That's bonkers. Anyways, now that this person is like clearly out of the picture, there are only 16 champions left in this entire competition. For like half a second, we jump to Kale and Dorian's POV. They're talking about the murder cases, and it occurs to them they can't rule out Selena as a suspect, and they have to accept the fact that it could possibly be her. Chapter 27, Selena and Nehemia are having one of their language learning dates, and they're walking around the grounds of the castle when they come across this black stone clock tower again. And Selena decides that she's going to ask Nehemia even more about these word marks, because obviously she's way more intrigued now that they're directly tied to these murders going on. And then Nehemia, every single time, she gets very cagey and she's like, they're not worth your time, you don't want to know, I don't really know that much. She's always giving non-answers, and she's almost kind of contradicting herself. Like, she's like, you don't want to know one minute, and then the next minute she's like, I don't even know anything about them. And it's like, but how do you know she doesn't want to know if you don't know? Selena decides that she's going to start telling Nehemia about the murders that have been going on in the castle. People who don't know about the competition don't know about the murders either. So Nehemia is a great listener, and she and Selena just start talking about the possibilities, and for some reason Nehemia still has not clued in that there's such thing as this competition. While they're walking through the gardens, they run into Cain, and Cain decides to just start throwing out insults at Selena, like he owns the place. He also starts exhibiting really weird behavior, like he's definitely trying to pick a fight with Selena, and he's really trying to bait her. Clearly, if they express any sort of violence, they both get on the spot, so she's clearly not going to give in to this. But the issue is that Nehemia thinks that she's Lady Lillian. So when Cain starts making jokes and basically vaguely threatening to reveal her true identity, and this really starts to freak Selena out because no one's supposed to know she's Selena Sardothian, not even Cain, but it kind of makes sense because Parrington was there when they picked up Selena from the salt mine. So it makes sense that he would know who she is, but for him to threaten to reveal that in front of Nehemia is like a big no-no. And if you didn't already love Nehemia enough, she basically finds an excuse to whisk Selena away, and Selena starts to be like, look, you probably have a lot of questions, and Nehemia is like, you know what? I don't need to know. That's up to you to decide when to tell me who you really are. And like, what a sweet friend. Mad respect for Nehemia for that. They decide to part ways, and Selena decides to go to the library because she is now convinced she needs to learn what these word marks are. Why are they at the murder scenes? Why are they on this stone clock tower? There's so many questions around these, and why won't Nehemia tell her anything? That's another thing that has her really spooked out. So she decides she's going to go to the library and figure it out. So she spends hours in the library finding literally nothing. She finds so many books, and they all say something about them, but they contradict each other, or they're all super vague, and basically she just ends up chasing word marks and circles and finding out nothing new. She's going book after book after book after book. Kale's basically sitting on the other side of the table making fun of her for her obsession with word marks. But then she finds a book towards the bottom of her stack called The Walking Dead. Not the TV show. It's a book. Something off the bat is Selena's like, I know I grabbed a lot of books off the shelves, but I know for a fact I did not pick this one off the shelf, so what's it doing in my stack? So she's a little confused, but then she opens it up and she finds some freaky stuff. She finds illustrations of men who look like the bodies at the murder scenes, with like their face frozen in screams and their skin peeled off and their eyes dark and hollow. And I guess Kale realizes that she's like super invested in her book, so he decides to pull a prank on her and scare her, which jerk move, by the way. That's like scaring someone who just watched a horror movie. Like, just don't do that. And then she decides to call it a night on her word mark search because she is adequately spooked out. Then chapter 8, which is a really cute and a really short one. So apparently in Selena's chambers, there's a literal game room, basically what you would consider our equivalent to a pool table in there. And she's trying to play it alone, but she really sucks at it. And Dorian, I guess, stopped by her rooms to see how she was doing, and he happens to be really good at this game. So he decides he's gonna show her how it's done, and she's like, you know what, I think I might just let him. And they end up playing for hours and talking, and it's really cute. And Dorian even has like this whole inner monologue about how smart she is, how much he enjoys actually spending time with her and talking to her. That's really it. Like, that's really all this chapter is, but it's honestly so cute and I love it. Chapter 29, we are going to flash forward a couple days to the next test. And all it really is that they have to fight with each other. And it's not for the purpose of like knocking out the other person or another person. It's really just to see how impressive you are. So basically Brillo, the weapons master, and the King of Aderlin are gonna watch every single match and see who impresses them and who doesn't, and the least impressive person goes home. Selena's waiting for her turn, and the guy who's supposed to go against her apparently just starts talking smack the entire time he's just making comments about how she's a woman and clearly, and just basically making a bunch of assumptions about how she got this far in the competition, and it is ticking her off. And he's basically teasing her for thinking she can win this competition as a jewel thief. But Celaena knows she's really here because she's the most notorious assassin of Adarlan. So when it comes time to spar with this guy, he thinks that he's gotten in her head, but in reality, he just woke up the inner psycho assassin that she is, and she takes him down in like 2 minutes. And then she walks out. And she did all the impressing she needs to, and naturally, Kale's mad because she's supposed to perform at middle level. She's supposed to be average, but clearly she's sick and tired of being average, and everyone picking her out as the wink link in this competition. And now we're gonna jump to Kaltain's POV. As always, she has a migraine. She's grossed out by Parrington's existence. She's still obsessed with Dorian, and she's still kissing up to the Queen of Adarlan, trying to get in her good graces so that she can marry her son, Dorian. They're at court, I guess, and her and the Queen are gossiping, as courtly ladies do, I suppose. And the Queen basically says, you know, if you weren't promised to Parrington, you'd make a great match for my son Dorian. Considering that it is Kaltain's life goal to marry Dorian, this gets to her head so badly that she's going to make some big decisions. Not right now, but soon, so hang tight. Chapter 30. Celaena and Kale are sparring and training together for the competition, and they are talking about the murders. Celaena does reveal that she thinks it is Cain, and then reveals to Kale that Cain made it very clear to her in front of Nehemia that he knows that she's not actually Lillian. And then Kale decides it's a good opportunity to try to fit in some flirting, and tells her that he thinks she has the chance to win the competition. I wouldn't say it's great flirting, but it's something. He's not picking a fight, so that's something. And they're just sparring and having the time of their lives when a guard comes to get Kale because there has been a fourth murder. A fourth murder, guys. There aren't even that many champions left. Like, at this rate, they're all gonna be gone before the final trial. So he's starting to head there, and then he realizes that Celaena's pretty invested in everything, and he decides to invite her. So I guess you could call this their first date. So they finally get to the murder investigation crime scene, and Celaena makes a couple observations. Word marks written in blood, but they're on the ground this time instead of the wall. It's the champion that she totally took down in the last trial, so that's not really gonna help with the allegations that it could be her. And then the body is covered in claw marks. And then, of course, all the other injuries to the body match the injuries to the bodies in the previous murders as well. So Celaena's naturally back off to the library to find out what in the world these word marks are and what they mean, because they are clearly very relevant. Nope. My dog just threw up. We got outside just in time, and she's okay. But poor girl. Soka, come here. You wanna say hello to everyone? Someone's having a rough day. Do you feel better now that that's all out of your system? Do you feel better? You just need little belly rubs, that's all. Please don't lick my face after you just threw up. Where were we? Anyways, Celaena goes back to the library to figure out more about word marks. Same thing as last time, doesn't find anything new, heads back to her rooms. So she's doing more research on word marks when Dorian stops by to visit. So they're discussing the murders and who it might be, and Celaena confronts Dorian for thinking that it's her. And he said, you know what, I may have thought that at one point, but that's not why I increased your guardage. I increased your guardage to protect you. So they're no longer convinced it's her, and if anything, more concerned about protecting her. They end up talking about a lot of different things, and it's really cute, and they really do have like their moment, and you can definitely tell that this is developing from a crush to like a mutual understanding, I guess. And it's really tender and it's really cute, but then he sees the ruby ring on her finger, and he kind of knows what it is. He knows it's from the party. He knows who else would have given it to her, and things get a little awkward. But anyways, we're gonna jump to Kale's POV. Do you remember how in part 1 of Throne of Glass I mentioned that something about Parrington is that he's always described as darkening. Basically, we just jump to Kale. I don't know if they're eating in like the dining hall or why exactly they were in the same room, but basically Kale is noticing like his eyes just like darken all of the time. And every time his eyes darken, the people around him just seem so heavy and miserable. Specifically in the scene, I believe it's Caltaine who's with Parrington, and he's like, why do his eyes keep darkening? And why does it seem to be affecting Caltaine? It's like a really weird situation, but that's just what he observes. Chapter 31 starts with a jump scare because Celaena's literally sleeping and then she's woken up by the ghost of Elena and basically just reiterates to her how important it is that she win this whole competition. And Celaena's like, yeah, you keep mentioning that, but maybe actually some help would be nice.
Look to your right. You will find the answers there.
Which is not helpful in the slightest. And then she literally disappears. Celaena's like, yeah, thanks for nothing. Thanks for waking me up in the middle of the night for literally 0 instructions. So that's great. It's the next morning. Celaena's clearly and obviously tired from her lovely little wake-up call that she got late last night. And they are at the next trial, which is poisons. Every single champion has a table in front of them, and on this table is 7 different goblets. Every single goblet has a different liquid in it, and their job is to order them from most poisonous to least poisonous. And they have to drink whichever one they put in the least poisonous spot and hope they don't die. So Celaena is actually super stressed because she does pretty good for most of them. Then she gets to like the last 2 goblets when it literally could go either way. She's like, this could either be a trick and this is water, or it's like more poisonous because you can't smell it, so it's more lethal. Like, she's thinking of all the possibilities, but this challenge is timed, so she has like only like a minute left and she's trying to figure out what to do. And then she remembers, I don't know if you remember from my part 1 video, one of the first things they ever did was all the champions got in one room and they introduced themselves. One of the champions, when he introduced himself, he said he was a master of poisons, and that is the person to her right. What did Elena say? What was Elena's help?
Look to your right. You'll find the answers there.
Celaena looks over and notices that he puts the goblets in a certain order, and so she decides to copy him with the first and the last goblet. And sure enough, her and this one champion who's like the master of poisons are the only ones who pass. Other people got poisoned. They didn't like die, like they weren't that kind of poisons, but they were definitely very ill and had to go to the infirmary. Chapter 32. Celaena and Nehemia are practicing their languages with each other, and they're just walking through the castle and talking, and they have a couple sweet moments while they're learning languages together and basically have one of those cute like, you're my best friend moments, and I love it, and their friendship is so sweet. But as they're walking through the halls, they hear barking. Apparently they got very close to Dorian's kennels, so they decided to go inside because they haven't been inside before, I guess. I don't know about y'all, but that'd be like one of the first places I go if I'm stuck in this castle for like months on end. But anyways, they're going into the kennels and they see Dorian there with like this fresh batch of puppies. Mama dog got out and there was an incident, and these are not purebred dogs. And then on top of that, so they were just going to give the dogs away, like not as hunting dogs, but as pets. But there was one dog specifically that didn't have a good demeanor and wasn't really good with people or kids. So they were just gonna like put the dog down. And Celaena's like, absolutely not. Like, I refuse to let you do that. She even goes as far to tell Dorian, like, if you're just gonna kill it, like, I'll keep it. And he's like, what are you gonna do with the dog? And she was like, well, I don't want it, but I'm not gonna let you kill this dog just because you don't like its personality. And so he's like, fine, you know what? I'm gonna make a point to train this dog and make sure that it learns to like people, and I will make sure it finds a loving home and a loving family. And for some reason it ends up being like a cute bonding moment for them. As they're leaving, Nehemia is like, you and the prince have a thing, don't you? And of course Celaena tries to deny it, but obviously we all know better, and we know they very much got it down bad for each other. And then she tells Nehemia goodnight, and I guess they walk past her chambers, so Nehemia goes into her rooms and Celaena is walking back to her rooms. She did complain to Kale and Dorian that the extra guards was just a little bit much and she felt like she couldn't breathe, so they're actually giving her some space now. Like, clearly some trust is being built up. and Kale and Dorian understand now that Celaena's a good person and they don't really have to worry about her. She's gonna compete in the competition. She's not gonna cause problems because she wants her freedom. As she's like walking back to her rooms and the guards are like a good bit behind her, and this part is very weird, so I'm just going to read it directly from the book. Something shifted in the reflection of the window and she whirled as she beheld the man standing behind her, but Cain didn't smile at her, not in that mocking way. Instead, he panted, his mouth open and closing like a fish retched from water. His dark eyes were wide, and he had a hand around his enormous throat. "Is something wrong?" she asked sweetly. He glanced from side to side at the guards, at the window, before his eyes snapped to hers. His grip on his throat tightened as if to silence the words that he fought to come out, and the ebony ring on his finger gleamed dully. Even though it should have been impossible, he seemed to have packed on an additional 10 pounds of muscles in the past few days. In fact, every time she had seen him, Cain seemed to be getting bigger and bigger. Her brows knotted, and she uncrossed her arms, and he took off down the hall like a jackrabbit, faster than he should have had the ability to run. He peered a few times over his shoulder, not at her or the confused and murmuring guards, but at something beyond. Celaena waited until the sounds of his fleeting footsteps faded, then hurried back to her own rooms. I'm sorry, what? Chapter 33, we are going to jump to Kaltain's point of view, and this is where we find out that she has an opium addiction. So that's a fun character development moment for her. She's just like chilling in her room with her opium, and then Parrington calls on her. So she's like trying to get rid of the smell and hide the evidence as fast as possible. When Parrington comes in and he's talking to her, and honestly, I don't remember what he was talking about. It's not even really relevant, but she's just like straight up having hallucinations while he's talking to her. So she is like high as a kite. So Parrington's talking about Dorian, and he said that Dorian was asking about Kaltain, but then Lady Lillian kept trying to change the topic. This doesn't happen in the book, so I don't know if he's making this up. It sounds like he is from like the reader's standpoint. This leads Kaltain to like start brainstorming all the ways she could literally Lady Lillian and get her out of the picture while she's hallucinating. It's honestly, the whole scene's just a mess. So let's just jump to Celaena's POV. There's really nothing else that happens in Kaltain's. Celaena has not been in her rooms long after her really weird interaction with Cain when Nehemia comes bursting into her room sobbing. The King of Adarlan disappeared a couple weeks ago. He's just been gone. No one really knew what he was doing, where he was going, what he was up to. He just brought a bunch of soldiers with him and left. And Nehemia just got news that the King of Adarlan had 500 of her people murdered, and a lot of them were children of her country, Iolé. Nehemia is understandably heartbroken. Not only does she have to play the role of the grateful guest in this king's kingdom, but there's quite literally nothing she can do, and she's pretty much a sitting duck in enemy territory. It's honestly just all really heartbreaking, and it's a huge mess. Chapter 34, hours later, Nehemia ends up going back to her rooms to go to sleep for the night, and Celaena starts to feel ill. And by ill, I mean she's cramping. Having starved for over a year, this is the first time she's had cramps in over a year. And honestly, can we just take a minute to appreciate the realisticness of that from Sarah J. Maas's point of view? I feel like this topic does not come up in fantasy books ever. That's just attention to detail, and it's just realistic, and I applaud Sarah J. Maas for that. Anyways, Celaena's feeling really sick, and Dorian somehow finds out she's not feeling well, and he decides to come and keep her company and hang out with her for the day. They play like card games and read books and talk, and it's really cute. I feel like all of their times that they hang out is just super chill and really sweet and tender, and I love it. We kind of jump into Dorian's head for a little bit, and we basically learn that he is dying inside because he thinks that everything his father is doing is wrong, especially against the Ill-Way people, and he loves Nehemia. He thinks she's an amazing human being, and the fact that this is all happening to her, he feels so hopeless, despite the fact that he's doing everything he can to represent the Ill-Way people in all of their like political meetings. No one cares about his opinion because they keep nodding him off as like some young prince, but he can't outwardly discredit his father because that would be considered treason. So it's just a whole lot of mess. He basically gets to a point where he realizes that the same thing happened to Celaena. If you remember from my part 1 video, Celaena is from Terrasen, which 10 years ago was completely demolished by the King of Adarlan. And then Dorian has this moment where he realizes, although he can't say that what his father's doing is wrong, he can apologize. So he tells Celaena that that not only is he sorry for what's happened to the Eelway people, but he apologizes to her that her whole kingdom, all of Terrazin, was taken down in his father's greed. He also opens up to her that he didn't just pick her as an assassin because he thought she could win. He chose her because he knew it would bother his father the most if the person who won his competition was from one of these conquered kingdoms. And I think that does help you see Dorian in a different light rather than like a spoiled prince who does like to flirt around. Like, he clearly does have a heart and much more of a moral compass than his father. And as Dorian's going to leave, Celaena gives him a little on the cheek, and it's really cute. And we've waited a really long time for this to happen. I gotta do my job. So this chapter is in Chaol's point of view, and this actually takes place a little while later. I don't think it says exactly how big of a time jump, but we know that it's almost Yulemas, which is basically their version of Christmas. There are only 6 champions left. And what's really funny about the fact that this is Chaol's point of view is that he's actually third wheeling Celaena and Dorian right now as they're arm in arm walking through the gardens in the winter. Bless his ever-loving heart. But you know what? Maybe if you didn't insult her all the time, you would be walking arm in arm with her. Just a thought. And basically we hear his inner monologue of his jealousy and the woe is me, and we could care less about it. So we're just gonna jump over to Dorian and Celaena's POV. Dorian notices Celaena's necklace. Remember, she has that amulet the ghost of Queen Elena gave to her. So Dorian asks her about it, and she kind of panics, and she's like, oh, I found it in my rooms, like in one of the jewelry boxes that was given to me. And then Dorian pulls out a history lesson. When I was a boy, I used to read tales about the dawn of Adarlan. Gavin was my hero. I must have read every legend regarding their war with Erewhon. Elena, the first queen of Adarlan, had a magical amulet. In the battle with the Dark Lord, Gavin and Elena found themselves defenseless against him. He was about to kill the princess when a spirit appeared and gave her the necklace, and when she put it on, Erewhon couldn't harm her. She saw the Dark Lord for what he was and called him by his true name. It surprised him so much that he became distracted, and Gavin slew him. They called her necklace the Eye of Elena, but it's been lost for centuries. Are you screaming? Because I'm screaming. And basically she's just like, must be a replica then. And I guess he seems fine with that answer, so she really dodged a bullet. So she ends up going back to her rooms, and we find out that she is still trying to figure out what the word marks are. There have been no additional murders in the gap of time, but now that there's only 6 champions left, that means that the odds of her being murdered the next time around are a lot higher. So she's very determined to figure out what these word marks are and who's killing everyone and why they're doing it. While Celaena's reading, one of the books like falls off of her bed, so she goes to like get on the ground and like pick it up, and when she does, something catches her eye under her bed. Word marks written in chalk, and she recognizes that the marks are the same ones that she found at the murder scenes. She scrubs those word marks away so fast with water, and I do not blame her. I would be doing the same thing. As a matter of fact, I don't think I'd even sleep in that room again. I think I'd leave the room and never come back. I think if it were me, those passageways out of the castle would be looking really good right about now. So she just gets rid of those marks, and she decides that she needs some fresh air, so she's gonna leave her room for a bit. On her way out, she walks past the library, and she sees that Nehemia is in the library. And as she walks up to Nehemia, she takes a look at the book that she's reading. And not only is the book in the common tongue, but it is extremely advanced language. And Nehemia is reading it just fine. It occurs to Celaena, Nehemia has been lying about knowing the common tongue. And when Celaena tries to confront Nehemia about it, she responds in perfect common tongue with 0 accent. So she's been lying about not knowing the common tongue. So what else has she been lying about? And honestly, the first thing Celaena thinks of is that she's probably lying about how much she knows about word marks. Chapter 36. Celaena has not seen Nehemia for days, and although she has a lot of speculation about what in the world she witnessed and what it could possibly mean, she doesn't tell anyone about it. Also, happy Yulemas. It's Yulemas morning, I guess, now. And there is a festival or a ball tonight, and Celaena is not invited, and she is so stinking mad because you already know the other 5 champions who are still in the competition are invited. And Dorian comes to her rooms and provides her with a bunch of candies and chocolates. This is also where we find out Celaena's a very big sweet tooth. And then he brings her a gift. It is the dog that she decided to save. And then Celaena gives Dorian another thank you kiss on the cheek. They're basically unofficially official at this point is what it feels like. And then Dorian pulls the whole see see you at the Yulmus ceremony, so she's not invited to the ball, but she is invited to the ceremony. She decides to start getting ready for the ceremony because Yulmus is a very religious thing in Aderlin. As she's getting ready, she starts thinking about how Nehemia is going to this ball, and she starts to really second guess Nehemia's intentions, especially after the massacre of her people, and she's starting to wonder if Nehemia is going to seek revenge at this masquerade party. So she decides, for the safety of everyone else, she is going to crash the party. Chapter 37, we are at the Yulmus ceremony. As you guessed, the temple that they're in is also entirely made of glass. This ceremony consists of a lot of things, but the most important thing and the very last thing it consists of is called the Procession of the Gods. The procession is a bunch of blindfolded girls who dress in costumes with little props, each representing one of the gods. The children will then blindly stop in front of one person and present them with a gift that represents whatever that god or goddess represents. That person then receives that god or goddess's favor and blessing. So that was a bit of a mouthful, so I had to read that one. So the god of war representative stops in front of Duke Parrington and presents him with a miniature sword. Then the goddess of love passes Selena, and she's a little upset about that because I think she was hoping for a little confirmation of her and Dorian's flirtations, but unfortunately that does not happen. But then the goddess of the hunt and the protector of the young representative walks right up to Selena and presents her with a golden arrow. Chapter 38, Philippa is in on Selena's scheme, getting her ready for the masquerade ball. Obviously, Philippa doesn't know her exact reasons for wanting to go. She just thinks that Selena wants to sneak in and go. So Philippa's helping her get ready. And they basically scheme a way to get her out and past the guards and into the ball. We jump to Dorian's POV. He's at the ball having a good time, unfortunately trying to dance with all the eligible ladies that his mother wants him to take a shot with. And then he sees Selena, and he says, even with a mask, I would have known it was her. Good answer. She has her Cinderella moment where she's like walking down the stairs and everyone stops and looks at her. This is definitely where you can see that Cinderella influence that was in the original plot. Dorian has this thought as she's ascending the stairs, and it melts my heart every time. Seeing her made him feel like a man. She was something out of a dream in which he was not a spoiled young prince, but a king. Sorry, I really just love that line. So he decides he's gonna greet her at the bottom of the stairs as she's like getting closer to the bottom, so he's like confidently walking over, and then all of a sudden, Kale swipes right in. So let's jump to Kale's POV because he is absolutely ticked off. But Selena rightfully calls him out because sure enough, the other 5 champions were invited and are in attendance. So there's literally no reason why she should not be allowed there. He says, fine, you can stay, but I'm gonna stay by your side the entire night. And he watches her like a hawk to the point where, although everyone's like very intrigued by who she is, literally everyone's afraid to like come up to her and talk to her because Kale's being all guard doggish. So she is forced to sit by and watch Dorian dance with a bunch of other women. But Selena also does keep an eye on Nehemia. For like the first couple hours or so, she stays seated by the queen as their humble guest. Then a couple hours in, she decides that she's too tired, rightfully so. She's still in mourning of her people, and she decides that she's gonna leave, but on her way out, she decides to stop by and say hello to Selena real quick, or Lady Lillian. And something off the bat that rubs Selena the wrong way is that she goes back to shaky common tongue. She has a really strong Ilway accent again, and she's speaking in broken language in the common tongue, which Selena now knows that she's mastered the common tongue and she's fluent in it. So she's wondering why she's keeping up the ruse with her right now. And at this point, Selena's like, you know what? I feel bad that I even thought that she would try to anyone tonight and get her revenge. And she realizes that her friend is just in mourning, and you know what, her friend hasn't asked questions even though she knows that there's some secrets she's keeping from her, so the best she can do is respect her friend's privacy for the time being. Now that Selena knows everyone's safe, she can finally chill, and she wants to dance real bad. So she asks Kale to dance with her, and he rejects. He's so mean about it too. He's like, absolutely not. And then Dorian comes to save the day, and he asks Selena to dance, and they dance a good bit. Chapter 39, we jump to Dorian's POV where he's dancing with Selena. They dance for multiple dances. And for those of you who watch like period films, dancing with someone more than once, let alone multiple times, is like a big deal. And Dorian's having the time of his life. Then we jump to Kale's point of view and he is just absolutely steaming watching them in the distance. It's so funny because it's literally his own fault. Like, she asked him to dance. Not only did he say no, but he was a total jerk about it. And then he's gonna get all upset and jealous that she's dancing with someone else. This is also kind of the chapter where he accepts the fact that they're in love and there's nothing he can do about it. And it breaks him just a little bit. Let's jump to, and if that POV wasn't painful enough, let's jump to Kaltain's POV, and she's just absolutely at her breaking point. And she basically decides Lady Lillian needs to be eliminated by any means necessary. And then we jump to Selena's point of view, and Dorian walks her back to her rooms, and he gives her a kiss goodnight. Except for this time, we have graduated from cheek kisses, and it's a real kiss. And thus, romance was born. Chapter 40. Let's start with one of Sarah J. Maas's biggest crimes. Selena decides to name the dog that Dorian gave her. She decides to name it Fleetfoot. If that isn't the dumbest name for a dog you've ever heard, I'm concerned about what kind of dogs you know. Let's jump to Kaltain's point of view. She's talking with Parrington and basically she complains about how Dorian and the Lady Lillian were dancing all night, and she basically points it out to be, we are people of this court. It is our responsibility to know who she is, because if they're really dancing like that, then it's possible she could become the queen, and it's important that we know who our queen's gonna be. Parrington just decides, you know what? What in the world? I'm gonna tell you. He tells her everything. He tells her about the competition. He tells her that Lady Lillian is a competitor. And then he also tells her that Lady Lillian is the one and only Selena Sardothian. And Lady Kaltain is like, what are we gonna do about that? It's clear that Dorian's fallen in love with this woman and she's an assassin. We can't allow this. So Parrington reveals to her that there's gonna be a mini tournament for the last 4 competitors where it's 1v1 and 1v1, and then the winners fight off, and whoever wins that is the champion. He says right before the final match to decide who's the champion, there's this big toast and everyone like drinks some wine. He says, how about this? Why don't you give the toast and I'll create a distraction and you can slip some poison into Selena's goblet. And considering that eliminating the Lady Lillian, or who she now knows to be Selena Sardothian, was always her plan, she agrees. Chapter 41, Selena is in the library studying up more on word marks. And she actually does find some crazy stuff about word marks. There, looking up at her, were the symbols she'd seen near the bodies. And in the margin, written by someone centuries ago, was the explanation for sacrifices to the Ritterak. Using the victim's blood, mark the area around it accordingly. Once the creature has been summoned, these marks guide the exchange. For the flesh of the sacrifice, the beast will grant you the victim's strength. Someone was actually using the word marks to open a portal to summon this creature. It was impossible because magic was gone. But the text said that word marks existed outside of magic. What if their power still worked? Bum, bum, bum. It occurs to Selena. Nehemia knows what word marks are, and she thinks that Nehemia is using the word marks to start a rebellion. Selena decides that she's going to go into the secret passageways and tunnels behind her tapestry again to find out as much as she possibly can before confronting Nehemia. But then she turns into the tunnel and she hears chanting in another language. But it wasn't Nehemia, it was Cain. Chapter 42. Cain is legit summoning a Ritterak, and Selena is standing right there. And when the beast is summoned, Selena describes it as so. It was something out of an ancient god's nightmares. Its hairless gray skin was stretched tightly across its misshapen head, displaying a gaping mouth filled with black fangs. Its vaguely human body sank into its haunches, and it slid its long front arms across the stone floor. That is something from my nightmares. I can't even imagine how she's feeling in this moment. Like, she's in a dark passageway. There is nowhere to go but up the stairs. And I don't know about y'all, but when I'm running up the stairs, it's not really a very fast and graceful thing. And then Cain turns and sees her, and he says, "It wasn't meant to be you tonight, but this opportunity is too good to waste." So Selena books it. Oddly enough though, one of the first thoughts that she has is that she can't die in the tunnels. And when you're about to die, the thoughts that you have right before you're about to die are very revealing. And she thinks about Kale. She realizes that if she dies in these tunnels, no one will ever find her, and Kale will think she ran away. It's fine. I'm fine. So she's sprinting to these tunnels, and right as she gets to the stairs, she decides instead of going up to the stairs, she's gonna make a left. She goes to the tomb, because you remember what's in the tomb next to the 2 coffins? The sword Damaris. She grabs that sword and she's kapow, kapow, kapow. She is fighting with this thing, this Ridderak. It does get her hand. I think it bites her hand. Yeah, it bites her hand. She slays the beast and she is out of there. She books it right back up to her rooms. Honestly, why we're not concerned about where Cain is and what happens to him after this really beats me. If I were her, that would be all I'm thinking about, but she just books it up to her rooms. Someone is in her room. Thankfully, it's Nehemia. If it were anyone else, I feel like this would have gone entirely differently, but it's Nehemia. She sees that she's like gushing blood from her hands. And if tonight wasn't weird enough, Nehemia grabs her hand and starts chanting. Not in the common tongue, not in EOA, something else entirely. Selena doesn't even know what it is. The word marks start glowing all over Selena's skin, and then she passes out. Chapter 43, Selena wakes up and she looks at her hand, totally healed, no word marks, and she's like, did I just have like the most bonkers nightmare of my life? But then she looks over, Nehemia is in her room and basically tells her, the bite was poisonous, it would have killed you, I'm glad I was here. Nehemia starts asking questions, rightly so. In my opinion, I think Selena probably should have been asking a lot of questions too. But Selena lets Nehemia have her moment, and Selena ends up telling her everything about the competition, about her real identity, and about the serial killings, and basically about what she just witnessed down in the secret passages. And then Nehemia does something really, really sweet. I don't know how else to describe it, but something about it just like really warms my heart. But she comes up to her and with her finger like draws or whatever on her head, I don't know, but she gives her a name and she said, I'm giving you the name Alentia for when all of your other names are too much to bear. I'm not gonna cry, but like I don't know why, but something about that moment is just so special to me and I love that moment. And then they talk late into the night just about everything and about life. They open up to each other. Nehemia reveals, yeah, I know more about word marks, obviously, than I originally let on. So flash forward to the next morning. Selena and Nehemia are best friends again, but we're actually going to be in Selena and Kale's point of view. They're walking together, honestly, probably on their way to training. And Selena is highly debating telling Kale everything. And honestly, if it were not for the fact that she would have to give away the fact that there are secret passages coming from her room, she definitely would have, because she knows he's looking for the killer, and so it would make sense for her to tell him that it's Cain. But she decides that it doesn't really matter anyways, because she literally killed the Ridderak. She killed the creature. Cain doesn't have the creature to do his dirty work for him anymore. So they're walking through the hall on their way to wherever they're on their way to, and they run into the King of Aderlin. Chapter 44. Something dangerous lurked about him. It was an air of death that she'd felt standing before that black void summoned by Cain. It was the stench of another world, a dead world. No one knows where the king has been for weeks. And if that's not weird enough, things get weirder. We jump to Kale's point of view. Later that day. Not only did the king come back after a long time being away on a mysterious mission, but he came back alone. He claims that everyone with him, every single person with him, had died, and he was the only one who survived. And this is not sitting right with Kale. Like, he knows that clearly something is going on. I think this is the first moment where we really see Kale start to second guess the morality of everything that he does, but it occurs to him that he feels bad for Selena. He feels bad for her if she loses and has to go back to Endovir, but he also feels bad for her if she wins, because she will have to serve the king, not only in a similar capacity as him, but in a worse capacity as him. Chapter 45. It's a couple days later and Nox and Selena are training together. And Nox sees the scars on her hand because although it was healed and she's not poisoned anymore, it still left a mark. And Nox is like, what's going on? And she goes, listen, I know who's doing the murdering. It's way worse than you could imagine. No one's getting out of this alive. Like, you need to escape. He wants more information, but she won't say anything. And Nox somehow just starts piecing stuff together, and he's just like, you're not a jewel thief. Somehow he pieces together that she is Selena Sardothian, and she tells him about the Ridderak. She tells him about how it's been summoned by Cain and how Cain is making it a point to murder his competition, and she begs him to leave. She's like, you need to go because I don't know who's next and no one's safe. And Nox thanks her, and in the night he escapes. and he actually does get away. Chapter 46. It's probably the shortest chapter in the whole book. The final duel is today. The day has finally come. Dorian is nervous about the final duel, and frankly, Celaena's fate, because he does not want her to go back to Endovir, but he's also scared about what her years in servitude to his dad will look like. And Celaena reveals that not only is she terrified of losing, but for the first time she's realizing that she's equally terrified of winning. Chapter 47 starts in Kaltain's point of view. She gets her hands on the goblets and she dumps the poison into Celaena's goblet. Let's jump to Celaena's point of view. I think it's really funny how her main concern at the moment is that this duel is outside in the dead of winter, because honestly, I'd probably be annoyed with that too. Then all the important men are there. What I think is really funny is Celaena actually starts picking out multiple men in the crowd, is men that she's done some dirty jobs before for in the past when she was an assassin. And they're very nervous to see her, and she decides to keep a mental note of who all there is nervous to see her, that she's done jobs before, because she realizes that could come in handy in the future if she ever needs to do some blackmail. And then Nehemia is here as well because she knows about the competition now, so she decides to invite herself and attend the final duel to support her friend Celaena. She does have this really beautiful large wooden staff made from eelway wood, and it's very culturally significant in eelway. It's like a weapon, I guess. She makes the evil king uncomfy with that one, and I love it. So there's going to be 3 matches, 1v1, 1v1, then the 2 winners are going to face each other, and the winner becomes the king's champion. And something to emphasize here is they are not supposed to play to the death. This is emphasized in the rules multiple times. They're just supposed to get them into a, what's that called? Like a death position, like the blow would have killed them, if that makes sense. I'm sure there's a more official term for that. A life-threatening position, that's how you know they won. So Cain goes against the other champion first, one of the other final 4 contestants, and he takes him out within 3 minutes. And he literally has magical strength. So are we surprised? The book literally said that whoever the Ritterat killed, Cain would gain all of their strength. So he has the strength of like 4 or 5 different champions now. 5 including himself. Now it's Celaena's turn and she's going against Grave. As she's going to the ring, Kale offers her his sword, which is a very big deal because the pommel does actually represent his territory that he was supposed to be lord over, and it is a sensitive topic to him, so the fact that he offers that sword is a really big deal. But before she accepts, Nehemia steps in and she offers Celaena the eelway staff. Let it be with an eelway weapon that you take them down. Let wood from the forest of eelways defeat the steel of Aderlin. Let the king's champion be someone who understands how the innocent suffer. So Celaena takes the eelway staff and she faces Grave. Chapter 48. Celaena, she breaks his nose. She whacks him on the head. She sweeps him off his feet. She has this man down in 2 minutes. She bends over, and in Grave's ear she goes, "By the way, my name is Celaena Sardothian." Epic moment. So before the final fight between Cain and Celaena, they decide to make a toast to the soon-to-be victor. So Cain and Celaena are given absolutely no time at all. They basically take swigs of their goblets at this toast, and then they immediately have to jump into dueling each other. Even Dorian challenges his father at this point and says, like, is this really a good idea? Like, aren't you gonna allow them to rest for a couple minutes? But the king's like, no, like, let's do this right now. So the duel starts, and off the bat, Celaena notices her vision is getting kind of blurry. So Cain is coming after her insanely quick. Move after move after move. He is just nonstop, full force going at her. Her body just slowly starts to feel like more heavy and heavy and heavy, to the point where she mentally knows what move she needs to do, but she can't quite do it fast enough. Then Cain, who honestly, without the help of the strength of 4 other dead champions, he was already a pretty strong guy. At this point, obviously, she's picked up on the fact that she has been poisoned. Cain is also very aware that she's been poisoned, and at this point, he's kind of toying with her, like he's intentionally dragging this out. In chaos, we're gonna jump to Dorian's POV. He wants to stop it. He knows something is wrong. He's not quite tuned into the fact that she's been poisoned, but he can definitely tell something's going wrong. But if he interferes at all, he just can't. Then we jump to Kale's point of view, and this is where stuff gets really, really weird. He is actually right outside of the ring, so he can hear the entire conversation, and he hears how Cain is baiting Selena. Something that really rubs Kale the wrong way, though, is what Cain is saying about her family. As far as we know, Selena's been found almost frozen to death in a river when she was 8 years old, but Cain is talking about how did it feel to wake up in between your dead parents? Like, very intimate, very traumatic details about her life. And Kale wants to know how Cain knows all of that. And then we jump to Selena's POV, and she's accepted the fact that she's gonna die. And then she begins to hallucinate and sees all of these, like, creatures. I don't know how else to describe it, but in the book, Selena basically says she's looking at the army of the dead. She just knows that they've come for her. Chapter 49, Dorian's point of view. Selena is screaming her head off like he's never heard her scream before. At this point, he's picked up on the fact she's definitely been poisoned. She's definitely hallucinating. He sees Nehemia kind of move from the crowd, and she goes near Kale, like on the outside of this dueling ring, and she starts chanting in what he assumes is Eoway, and something he notices that no one else really sees is that underneath her cloak, she's tracing weird symbols in the air with her hands. Selena's POV. Who else comes to save the day than the ghost of Queen Elena? She comes, obviously visible to only Selena. She basically says to not be afraid. She scatters the army of the dead, and she starts to, like, slowly pull and siphon the poison from Selena's body. Selena stands up, and she's ready to go. She's weak, but she's no longer poisoned, and she's no longer hallucinating. Chapter 50. Cain seems nervous, and rightly so, because she was supposed to be down on the ground and not get back up, and here she is seeming totally no longer poisoned, and she's ready to fight again. He starts making killing blows because he's panicking, and he's ready to fight to the death, even though, if you remember, the rules are not to fight to the death. Blow after blow after blow. Selena takes Cain down, finally, and Selena wins. This is honestly such an exciting moment. If it weren't for how stressful the whole poisoning thing was, I'd be more excited right now. But honestly, it's just like something about the way this fight scene is described really stresses me out. Sarah J. Maas is the only author who can write fight scenes that I actually enjoy reading, so I'm not going to be able to actually summarize fight scenes for y'all. If you want a good fight scene, you just gotta read the book. But from me, you're gonna get the summary, which is Selena wins. The crazy thing is that the king is actually so angry. Like, he wanted Cain to win. Selena wins, but she's clearly not okay, so Dorian immediately calls for a healer to come and take her to the infirmary. In the chaos of everyone coming towards Selena, no one sees, except for Kale, that Cain has pulled out a dagger and he lunges for Selena to finish the job that he started. Kale sees this and he stops Cain by running his sword through him. And Kale kills Cain. Fun fact, although Kale has done a lot of the king's dirty work and he is responsible for a lot of deaths, he's never actually had to make the killing blow in his entire career. So he's a little traumatized, and also on top of that, he interfered. And that is not good, especially for this competition. The rules are very clear. So Kale disappears. He gets out of there so fast before anyone can even process what in the world just happened. And then something, I think I actually forgot to mention this earlier, so my bad, I'll mention it now. Dorian comes up to Selena, and while they're waiting for the healer to come to take her to the infirmary, he mentions that there was a mark on her forehead that glowed when she was having hallucinations. Where have we heard of glowing marks before? Great. Remember it for like 5 more books. And obviously a lot of people saw the mark burning on her forehead, so a lot of people have a lot of questions, but she can't even answer them. She doesn't even know what it was or why it was there. In this very chaotic moment, we're gonna actually jump to Kaltain's POV. She is absolutely fuming because not only did the poison fail, but now Dorian is over there like coddling Selena, being like, are you okay? I was so worried about you. And basically, like, it made the situation 10 times worse for her. She comes over to Parrington and she's like, you said this would work. Like, why didn't it work? Fix this. And Parrington does the worst humanly slimy crusty thing he could do. "What's in your hand, Lady Kaltain?" And basically in a very public manner draws attention to the fact that she's holding an empty vial that contained the poison that poisoned Celaena. Loudly accuses her and says, "You poisoned her, like you interfered in this competition," and then calls for the guards to take her away to the dungeons. As she's getting dragged away, clearly being like, excuse me, no, like, Parrington told me to do this. I didn't just decide to do this," which, like, honestly though, she kind of did already set upon the idea to Celaena a while ago, so in my opinion, she's not like 100% the victim here, but for Parrington to just completely be like, come on. And then what's crazy is as she's getting dragged to the dungeons, she overhears the Duke Parrington turn to the king and say, "I told you that she would do anything to get a crown." Duke Parrington knew the whole time, and he played her the whole time. He knew that she was in love with Dorian and she would do anything to become the queen, and he manipulated her and he used her for this entire book. Kaltain may have not been a good person. She may have even been a bad person, but what Parrington did was just evil. And frankly, she did not deserve that. Chapter 51. Dorian's talking to his father the next day, and he's basically like, "Okay, so what's the punishment for Chaol?" And his dad's like, "What do you think should be the punishment for Chaol?" And Dorian's like, straight up, "I think that he did a noble thing in protecting your champion, so I don't think he should be punished." And the king's like, "Okay, fine, we won't punish him." So that's at least good. Chaol's still gonna have to deal with the trauma of executing his first kill or taking his first life per se, but at least he's not gonna be punished by the king, so that's at least something. Then Dorian's like, "All right, so when are you gonna send Celaena her contract as your champion?" And the king is literally like, "I'll think about it. Part of me really just wants to send her back to the salt mines of Endovir." Clearly, like, with the Elway staff and everything, like, she was just trying to prove a point. And basically says to his son, like, "Maybe I'll try to prove a point to you, even though you won the competition, to not actually let you win." What a slimy man. So we're gonna jump to Celaena's point of view. Understandably covered in a lot of bruises, and she's got a lot of injuries. But Nehemia comes to visit her, and of course she is speaking in the perfect common tongue, and she has no Eoway accent. She basically confesses a lot to Celaena, including the fact that she healed her during the match. If that wasn't already crazy enough, I mean, we already kind of figured that based on the whole, like, chanting and hand symbols thing, but then she also reveals that she also saw the Queen Elena's ghost, and she also saw the army of the dead. Then she confesses that she knows not only what word marks are, but how to use them and, like, tap into their magic, because it's not like normal magic. It still works even though magic doesn't exist. It's a different type of magic, but she knows how to tap into that power. And although Cain had been summoning all of the marks, she had been banishing the marks. So remember the chalk marks that we saw under Celaena's bed that had her freaking out? Apparently those were made by Nehemia, and those were marks of protection. And then Nehemia shares one last thing. And what's wild is that, you remember when she called her Alentia and she drew a symbol on her forehead? So you can assume that the symbol that glowed on her forehead during the duel was the one that Nehemia had drawn on her, but it wasn't. Nehemia actually said that was not a word mark. To her knowledge, she didn't even know what that mark was. Like, she had no clue what it was. But it seemed to be like a part of who she was. It didn't seem like someone had drawn it on or created it. Like, it seemed to be a part of her being. I don't know if that makes sense. Does that make sense? I think it's definitely a really weird connection to draw, but the connection was made. Sarah J. Maas never does anything by accident, so you gotta pay attention to those little weird things like that that come up. Chapter 52, we're so close. The next morning, Dorian comes to visit, and Dorian's an absolute mess, and he feels horrible, and he apologizes to her about 1,000 times because he did nothing. Like, he just sat by and he didn't do anything. Frankly, he couldn't do anything, but he feels sick about it. And Celaena's upset by this because, first of all, she's like, "No, there was nothing you could have done, so, like, stop making this about you." And then second off, him being this upset has her really concerned, because that means that emotionally he's starting to choose her over the crown. Although thankfully he didn't act on it, he was definitely contemplating it, and he has regrets. So she kind of sees this all as a recipe for disaster. So she has some hard decisions to make. But for the time being, let's jump to Duke Parrington's POV. He knows what word marks are, obviously. I think you could have assumed that because Cain was his champion, but he knows what word marks are. But he also has no clue what the mark was that was on Celaena's forehead. He also sensed the army of the dead, so he didn't see them, but he sensed them. And he's actually with the king right now, and they're kind of talking about everything that just happened, and the king was like, you know what, I am going to give the contract to Celaena to be my champion, but we are definitely going to be keeping a really close eye on her for the time being. And then the king congratulates Parrington on successfully manipulating Kaltain. So the king has been in on it from the beginning, like every step of the way. He's known what's going on. He was a part of what was going on. Slimy, crusty men. Honestly, it even gets crazier. So the king says, were you using the power on her? No, I've relaxed it recently as you suggested, the Duke replied, rotating the obsidian ring around his thick finger. Besides, she was starting to look noticeably affected, drained and pale, and she even mentioned the headaches. Remember we talked about how Kaltain always had headaches? She turned to opium to get rid of them. That was Parrington's fault, using whatever the power is. The treachery of Lady Kaltain was disturbing, but he had known of Parrington's plan to reveal her character, even to prove how easily she'd adapt to their plans and how strong her determination ran. He would have prevented it. Such a public revelation only brought about irritating questions. It was clever of you to experiment on her. She's become a strong ally and still suspects nothing of your influence. I have high hopes for this power. Looking at his own black ring. So Parrington has a black ring, and the king has a black ring. No one else has these black rings. That's not true. Cain had one. Clearly, we're noticing a pattern that all of these horrible, horrible people are wearing these black rings. Does it feel like a cult yet? It should. It really should. Cain proved the physical transformative effects, and Kaltain proves the ability to influence thoughts and emotions. I would like to test its full ability to hone the minds of a few others. So these skeevy men have been plotting for a while, and they're continuing to plot. And it is absolutely insane. And if this is as far as you've gotten in the series and you don't know what happens in the future, it's insane. You're in for a ride. When the scandal has been forgotten and the assassin is busy with my work, we'll make Kaltain an offer she can't refuse. Then the king tells the Duke to, on an entirely different note, chill with trying to use Nehemia as a weapon against Eelway and basically threatening to use her as a hostage, and basically says it's attracting too much attention. Chapter 53. So it's one full week later. Celaena is still basically bedridden, but she's reading a lot and she's resting and she's healing a lot. But she still has not received a contract from the king. It's revealed that Dorian comes and reads to her every single night. They're basically a couple at this point, and I'm here for it. I love it. You know, the assassin and the prince. What a great combination. But this particular day, Dorian's not there. Hale comes to visit Celaena, and this is the first time she has seen him since everything went down. This is where stuff gets really tricky because she's basically realizing how much she missed him. She went from seeing him every day to not seeing him for a week, and she's basically talking about how hard that was for her and how worried she was for him. And all of a sudden she wants to make sure that he's okay because she knows what it's like to take lives. She does it all the time for work, despite being a very sensitive person and having a very strong moral compass. And so she decides to tell him about her first experience making her first kill and trying to make him feel better, and actually succeeds a little bit. You know, doesn't heal him on the spot, but they have a bonding moment and they both realize that they're both actually pretty similar. Like, there's not that much that separates them. And I feel like this is also a really big moment where Kale's prejudice towards her like really starts to thaw and melt away. It's about time. On his way out, they give each other a cute little hug as friends. They basically decide that they're going to be friends since they're going to have to work together from now on, with her being the champion, or at least will be when she gets her contract. While they're like hugging each other goodbye, and Celaena's realizing like, oh shoot, like he means a lot more to me than I thought he did. They realize that Dorian's been in the doorway watching this whole time. So Dorian has come to tell her, congrats, you're getting the contract, you're officially the champion once you sign. And she's like, great, fantastic, looking forward to it. But then again, like, she's not really. She's just looking forward to her freedom at the end of 4 years. And then Dorian goes to give her a little smooch, since they're basically lovers at this point, and she like dodges him. She says what they both know and have been putting off. He's a prince, she's an assassin, and as soon as her 4 years are up, she's leaving, and she's never looking back, because Aderlin has never been and will never be her home. Basically said that she would never consider staying or consider looking back, not even for Dorian. And so this is where they low-key break up before they really ever even started dating. I mean, even if they would have, it all would have been extremely secret. But she just basically says, you know what, there's not even a point in pretending, because this is just never gonna happen. I have a lot of respect for her for that, but it also, just a little bit, just, ugh. Chapter 54. Kale comes to visit Selena and makes a joke about like, oh, Dorian's not in here, like, whatever. And she's like, oh no, we ended things, like, I ended things. And she basically says her reasoning, and he was like, well, it's about time, like, I figured that would happen, so it's better you guys ended it now rather than got too involved and too serious and then someone's heart got broken, you know, that wouldn't be good. So Kale is suspiciously relieved, but then he has this thought. He's afraid that 4 years of friendship with Selena won't be enough, because he realizes that he will also be staying in Aderlin, and when she leaves, she will also be leaving him, and he will never see her again. And he's starting to realize that 4 years feels like a lot shorter of a time than he thought. And the Grinch's heart grew 10 times that day. Later that night, after Selena knows that she's safe, she goes down to the passageways, and she goes down to Queen Elena and King Gavin's tomb. She thanks the queen for helping her in siphoning the poison and helping her win, but then says, okay, like, I became the champion, that's one thing you asked me to do, so what's next? Like, why exactly did you need me to become the champion? Honestly, Elena just gives her so many non-answers, and I could try to decipher them and get into all of them with you, but they're mostly going to be recovered and explained more in the next book, so I'm not going to waste your time with that for this book. You can subscribe and stay tuned for the Crown of Midnight videos, where we'll go a little bit more into what Queen Elena wants out of Selena. But for now, she just gives her a lot of non-answers. And then chapter 55, which is the last chapter of the whole book. Selena is before the king, ready to sign her contract. But there are some rules. There will be no questioning on your part. When I tell you to do something, you will do it. I don't need to explain myself to you. If you somehow are caught, you will deny any connection with me to your last breath. Should you fail any of my tasks, should you forget to return, you will pay dearly. If you do not return from the mission on which I sent you, I'll have your friend, the captain, aka Kale, killed. If you fail to return after that, I will have Nehemia killed. Then I will have all of her brothers executed. Not long after that, I will bury her mother beside them. Do not believe I am not as cunning and stealthy as you are. And that sets the pace for book 2, when Selena is officially the King's Champion. That is the end of the entire recap of Throne of Glass. Stay tuned if you want to see my entire recap of Crown of Midnight. But for now, you should enjoy some of my other Sarah J. Maas related videos, and I will see you next Monday for a new video.